What's up everyone, welcome back to another video. On today's episode we're going to be working on the MK4 GTI. I know in the Q&A I said we'd get to drive in the S4, but I did discover that there was quite a big boost leak at the front mount. It was actually leaking, so I have a replacement coming in for that. Once that's here, we'll get to driving and tuning the S4. But in the meantime, I've been wanting to install a wideband, and I actually have one lying around now since the S4's Max ECU came with its own sensor and controller. So we're gonna get to installing that today. In terms of location, I want it to be super clean, so I'm thinking the driver's vent. We're also gonna be cleaning up the other gauges that are currently installed and reconnecting the boost gauge, which I had to disconnect when I was doing the battery relocation. In terms of future goals, I do want to eventually get a bigger turbo on this car. When I first got the car, actually my dream was to equip it with a T3 T450 trim setup. I'm sure nowadays there's more modern options that are better suited to the car, but regardless, we're going to need a wideband to tune it, so it's going to be good to install. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we'll do is get the car in the air and get ready to install our sensor. Alright, so as you can see, there is an unused bung right on our test pipe, so we're going to utilize that spot for our new wideband sensor. So now I have to run that wire back into the interior. So I'm going to start by just following the same path that the front O2 sensor is following. And it basically goes above the subframe and then up to the passenger side of the motor. I'm going to try to keep it nice and tidy and away from anything that is hot. Right about here is where the wire is going to come up. So we'll just pull it up so it lands somewhere right there for now. And here's how it looks over here. We have our sensor wire coming through under here over the subframe, and then we pulled it on the other side in the engine bay. So we should be good under here. Now we can lower the car and work from the top. So we just removed the battery line so that we can enlarge the hole inside of that grommet right next to the brake master cylinder. We're going to run the battery cable back through that along with our wideband wire and a vacuum line for our boost gauge. Alright, so there's the hole that we enlarged. As you can see, I can now fit the 0 gauge wire through with some space around it. Now we'll just put a grommet in there and fish the wires through. While I have this wire off, I'm also going to add some lume just to make it less obvious and make the bay a little bit cleaner. For the boost gauge, we have our vac line. We're going to route this nice, and then we're going to add a T-fitting right at the FPR and get our vac source from there. Alright, so we have our two lines coming in right there. We have our wideband line on the right and the vac line on the left. For the wideband, we're going to install it in this vent right here, so we have to remove the switch and the dimmer, and then we'll pop the vent off and fit the gauge. For the boost gauge, it's already mounted, so we just need to pop it off and connect the back line. And then after that, we're just going to remove those two gauges that we don't really need. It's just oil temp and a voltmeter. So let's just get to work on getting this vent off. Whoa. All right, so we have the gauge right here, and we have our vent. I do have the same diameter drill bit, so I'm going to just trace it onto the vent. I found that you could actually just use some little snippers like this one, which is kind of for thin sheet metal, and it cuts through this plastic pretty well. So I'm going to try that, and then if I need to trim it a little bit more with the Dremel, we'll do that if we need to. Alright, and I would just keep trimming and then test fitting and trimming and going back and forth, just because you want a really tight fit, so you don't want to trim too much. I think we should be good on this one right here. So it should have some resistance. Perfect. As you can see, it's really hard to separate after it's in, and it can rotate a little but not much. So now we could go mount this in the car, and we'll walk through the wiring before we do that though. Alright, for our wiring, it's super simple. We have red, this is going to be our power source. Black is our ground. Our yellow and brown wires are analog out. We're not going to need these. And then white is dimmer source, so I'm not going to have this connected to a dimmer, so it'll just be at full brightness all of the time. For the power, I'm going to add this inline 10 amp fuse with a ring terminal on this side. And this is going to connect to the 75X terminal on the fuse panel. For the ground, I generally like running sensor grounds to the engine block. Alright, so our gauge is installed, looking good. Now we're just going to pop this off so that we can install our vacuum line. Now we just have to hook up our ring terminal to a 12-volt switch source, which is the 75X, the leftmost terminal on this fuse panel right here. Alright, so the air fuel gauge is good to go. We have everything wired up. We still have to clean up some of the wiring down there, but we'll wait to make sure that it works first. Last thing that we'll do in here is remove that pod and gauges. We don't really need them anymore. Another thing I want to do real quick is fix up this catch can mount. It's really flimsy and ugly, so we're going to clean that up real quick. Should just take a few minutes, and then we'll finalize the front mount piping. Just finished hooking everything up, so we are good to go. We're gonna try it out by just letting the car warm up. We should see some extra fuel during warm-up enrichment, and then once it hits closed loop, we should be seeing 14.7 AFR at idle or lambda 1. After that, we'll go take it for a quick spin and make sure we're seeing some richer AFR during boost, and make sure everything looks good. Alright guys, well I'm sure that was a little hard to see just because of the glare from the sun, but the values were exactly what I was expecting. 14.7 during cruise or lambda 1, and low 11s during boost. Another thing that I didn't mention, you should probably calibrate your sensor before you go off and drive with it. I've covered this in a previous wideband video, so I'll link that above so you guys know how to do that. I'm really happy with how the vent came out. It looks super clean. Just another fun project that's reasonably cheap, in this case free. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.